And we're going to just look at our overview first. So we're going to look at timers. We're going to look at schedules, and I've broken schedules down into quite a few different parts. So we're going to look at class schedules first, then I guess a basic schedule, our first then schedule, desk schedules, and then looking at schedules for older students, older children. So that's our layout for today, and then we'll have some questions afterwards. So let's have a look at those. So with regards to timers, what I'm talking about is a visual timer, and a visual timer shows the passage of time through the use of a disc, and that disappears, the disc disappears, or sometimes it can appear, I guess in some respects, as time elapses. So unlike traditional timers like on your watch and things like that, they're kind of, those traditional timers are kind of quite abstract to understand time and how much is left. So a visual timer is actually quite a concrete way of knowing how much time you've got left, and it depicts how much time is remaining. And it can help actually reduce the stress and help manage school life. So visual timers actually tell students how long and when they will have to do an activity. And timers allow you to pre-warn students when an activity is either starting or finishing. They help answer many questions students have, like what's happening, what order, what time, what's next, how long. But they can also do a lot of other things. So what else can timers actually do? So they can ease stressful transitions by showing how much longer there is to go before the change. So 5 more minutes really means 5 more minutes, and they can get an idea. And I've just noticed there's like a big error in my, slide there, reduce anxiety bay. Don't know what word that is. But anyway, by it should be. 5 minutes really means 5 minutes, and they can get an understanding of what that actually means. You can show when challenging activities will end. So a lot of students, particularly students with autism spectrum disorder, it's very hard to get them engaged in activities that they don't really like. So when it's a challenging activity, then if you put a timer on, they know when it's going to finish. So, you might have, say music might be really challenging for them. So if you have the timer on, we've got to do 30 minutes of music, and then you can have some quiet time after that. Then they know when that's going to finish. They also help everybody. They help everyone, especially new staff or visitors, to stick to a routine. So it's really good for when casual teachers come in to have a timer in. They also help develop an internal clock. You'd be surprised, particularly with children on autism spectrum, how in tune they are sometimes with time, even if they can't tell the time. So it helps them develop that internal clock. You can also see at a glance when how much time is left. So that's a really good thing for students with that. And also it helps to keep lessons focused and activities focused, so that you can actually keep on track, and students can keep on track when they know, oh, I've only got like 5 minutes to go. I've got to get this done. So that keep them on track. They might have been daydreaming for 10 minutes, but they'll know they've got to finish in time. It can actually help manage small groups. So if you have rotations and things like that, so visual timers can help you with those rotations. And also, for example, you might be doing some individualized or instruction, so you can keep you on task for that whilst other things are going on in the classroom. And they can also help children self-manage their time. So if they're doing individual work, they might be able to have a visual timer next to them, and they know that when they finish that individual work, they can go and do something else. They're great for tests and exams. Say some of our students might be doing NAPLAN, for example. It helps them to know how much time they've got left. You could use a visual timer for news or debating or public speaking or presenting things to the class. So that's a really helpful way, and different to if you've actually got a timer on a stopwatch. students have no idea how long they've got left if you're just using a stopwatch. So a visual timer is really helpful there. And I guess what's really great about them is it actually helps empower students to manage their own time, all activities in their own time. You can also use them for developing social skills, particularly things like turn taking. So if you're doing specific teaching of skills, then like turn taking or sharing, then perhaps you can have a visual time and say, well, you can have it for 2 minutes and you can have this item then for 2 minutes, and it helps with that learning of turn taking, which doesn't come naturally to students who are neurologically diverse. You can also use a visual timer for break times. So it can help students to regulate their own break times. They know when they're going to occur. They know how long they're going to occur for. You can set them for, breaks for toilets or drinks or snacks, things like that. So some students want to eat all the time. You say, okay, well, you can eat in 45 minutes time. So you can put that timer on then. It also helps to use visual timers to chunk work down. So if you break it, and we all know about chunking, so we break a task down into smaller chunks, and you can put, you've got to do reading for 5 minutes, timer, writing for 5 minutes, you can put your visual timer on again, and then you've got to edit for 5 minutes, checking your work. One of the good things about, and that I use timers for a lot in the classroom, is managing special interests. So a lot of students with autism spectrum disorder and other neurologically diverse disorders, they have special interests, and we all have special interests, but they have significant interests in certain areas. And sometimes we use those as motivators. So they do their non-preferred tasks first, and then we use a visual timer to say, okay, you can have your preferred item, your preferred activity for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. And putting a visual timer on supports students to know that activity, that preferred activity, is going to be finishing shortly. Because sometimes when they get to do their special activity or have their special item, giving that up is a little bit tricky or a little bit difficult. So having that visual timer can help in that space. It can also help students to slow down or speed up. Sometimes, again, students have difficulty knowing how long they've got to complete something. So sometimes they'll just rush through something going, well, it's task completion is kind of what they've got to do. But if you say, no, you've got to actually spend 10 or 15 minutes on this task, then you can break it down. You might even use a visual timer to go, okay, well, there's 15 minutes for this task. It's got 5 different questions on it, for example. We have 3 minutes spent on each question. And you might break it down and chunk it down like that and have a visual timer for 3 minutes for each question. So timers create a great finish point, visual timers. So I'm talking about visual timers the whole time here. And there's a whole heap of different types of visual timers available. I've just listed 3 different websites there on the screen where you can currently get visual timers from. Check them out because some of them aren't real durable, some of them are. So it's good to have a look at quite a few and find out which ones are durable enough that can perhaps, I guess, when someone gets frustrated with the timer, they can sometimes throw them or do things like that. So just to make sure that it's a fairly durable timer is a really good thing, or that it has an attachment where you can put it up high or something like that. So very, very helpful to have a look at the types of timers available before you get a school to purchase them or you purchase one yourself. Has anybody used a visual timer at all in a classroom or perhaps at home? And if you have, what did you discover or how did you find it work? Did it work well? You can pop that in the chat box. Did it work well? Did it really help? Sometimes it can really help to avoid meltdowns. So that's a really good, especially with those special interests. So that's a really good use of a visual timer. It just if you just said, no, it's finished time, and you just take something from a child that they've had their special interest, if they'll have a meltdown. If you had the timer on, they often just hand it over. So so that's a really great benefit of visual timers. So if you've used one, let me know if you've had that. You can pop that in the chat box if you've used a visual timer in a classroom. If not, have a good look at them and see what's available for you to use, and perhaps ask whilst you're on work placement if the school has any, and with some of the children that you might be working with, perhaps use them. Let's have a look. Timers work really well to give students a finish point. Absolutely, they do. Absolutely, finish points are really, really good to have. Anyone else, discover anything if they've used a timer? You can pop that in there. So, yeah, if you haven't, that's great. That's fine. That's what we're here for, to learn about them and to see how they work when you do get an opportunity to use them. You can even use them at home with your own children, helping them know, they've got to have a certain task done by a certain time, say their homework. Pop on the timer. You've got to spend 30 minutes, doing your homework. You've got to maybe do 15 minutes of reading. So having that timer on is really helpful for those, and you end up with less little arguments going on in that space. All right, so visual timers and stress. Now, although timers can provide a time frame for students to work within, allowing them to stay focused and on schedule, they can also be a source of stress for some students, believe it or not. Worries can include completing too soon, not finishing in time, even hearing the timer go off can be stressful. So talking about time in the classroom as much as possible can be really beneficial to reduce the stressor related to using a timer. So firstly, I guess there's a few different steps in that. So firstly, make certain that the task that the child has been given is actually achievable within the time frame that has been specified with the timer. So that they don't have to be concerned about. It's got to be achievable. You can do this by modelling. So you might use the timer on yourself in the classroom, and you can say, oh, I've only got 5 minutes left. I need to work a bit faster. Or you might say, oh no, I ran out of time. Oh well, that's okay. It's okay. It doesn't matter. So those sorts of things, because running out of time can be very stressful for children, particularly those with anxiety. And so demonstrating and modelling that, everybody runs out of time can be really supportive and helpful. It's kind of like a social story in some way of you acting that out. A second way is actually social stories. So to help reduce the stress of time management, writing social stories about what can happen if you run out of time. So we always work with time, like everybody in society. We've all got time schedules. You've got to be to school on time. You've got to be to work on time. You've got to get to soccer or netball or catch a train on time. So social stories about what happens if the timer runs out is really helpful. So if the timer runs out in the classroom, what happens? You can have a social story to say, you can request more time. Is it necessary to pack up? So what do I do when the timer finishes? So social stories can really help spell out what to do when you run out of time. Now, a social story, if you haven't come across those before, social stories really just are basic stories with pictures and words that explain in a sort of a step-by-step process a situation. For example, it might say, when I do my maths, Mrs. Robinson will put on the timer, and there's a picture of them doing their maths. Next page might say, when the timer goes, I need to close my maths book, put my maths book in the tub, and then the next page might say, if I haven't finished my task, it's okay, I can work on it later, and things like that. So it's very, very simple. They don't have to be complicated. Some can have more words, some can have less. So they're just simple stories that you make up on the computer, or you can make them up on the iPad and have a little video. So that's about social stories. So visual schedules can also support the use of timers so that students understand what happens next when the timer goes off. So if you've got a schedule in the classroom that says morning routine, English, might say fruit break, and so you can have a timer on there, and they know that when that timer goes off for that section, then the next section is coming. So the next part. So if it's, if English is finished, they know that the next bit is, brain break or fruit break or whatever it might be. So so that's a really important part of reducing the stress. So also, I was just talking about it before, but explaining why it's important, why time and being on time is important for everyday living. We've all got to catch a bus, we've all got to catch trains and adhere to schedules for transportation and things like that. So, or, get to work on time to hold down a job. So time is really important. And so it's, these sorts of timers in the classroom help prepare them for real life. One of the best things to use with a timer is a warning, which might sound kind of funny, but giving a 5-minute warning before the timer finishes, as long as it's not a 5-minute timer, but that might be a 1-minute warning, but giving a 5-minute warning before the timer ends, particularly for, say, a special interest activity, can make a significant difference to the smoothness of the transition from the preferred activity to, or not even the preferred activity, from one activity to another. So don't underestimate the usefulness of giving warnings that time is almost up. Okay. All right. So let's move on now to visual schedules. So, what is a visual schedule? Now, most of us have a diary. Some of us have a written diary. Some of us have it in our iPhones or our smartphones, or we have a calendar on the back of the pantry door. But we all have some sort of diary or calendar that reminds us what's going on in our lives and what we need to do, and what's, sort of what's necessary. And probably a lot of us wouldn't cope if we didn't have some sort of timetable to coordinate a family of, 4 or 5 or 6 or more, even, family of 3. We need to have some sort of coordination between all the people. So students that struggle with communication, remembering that communication is both, you can internalize it, so it's communication is both received and expressed. So those that struggle with communication may have difficulty understanding and recalling what's going on and what's expected of them. So it's even true if you have excellent hearing or memory. You can have trouble remembering what's going on and what to do. If I don't write things down, I forget. It goes out the window. So, and these difficulties can make students anxious. So not being able to remember can make people anxious about what's going on, especially if they're concerned about things that they don't like, or they find stressful. So some students really don't like certain subjects at school and they find them stressful. So knowing when they're happening and when they're going to be over is really important. It could also imply that they're unaware of when positive or favoured activities are happening. So a schedule is really important in that place. And we're talking again about visual schedules. So now when I say a visual schedule, it could be known as a visual timetable. It's basically a visual display of information, of events. Now the visuals can be real objects, or they could be photographs, or they could be pictures, or they could be words. So they can be a few different things depending on the cognitive capacity of the student. So you can see here we've got a few different samples on the page here on the screen. What is going on? So it's first and next, or first and then. We've got some visual schedules that are about steps in an activity, so how to complete an activity. The tasks to be completed, so visual schedules can tell you about tasks to be completed in a session. So, you might have to do in a morning session, you might have to do spelling and write a story and read a book. So it can give you a list of tasks that you have to be completed. They could be a timetable for an entire day. They could also be a timetable for a week. Usually not much longer than that. It's a little bit too much, but we do have monthly timetables essentially of what's going on in our calendar. So they can take a variety of appearances. So visual schedules can help reduce anxiety. And Shelley, I was just about to say that and you've actually popped it in there. So visual schedules are great for students who have anxiety. They help the children know what's next, which can make them feel less anxious in the classroom. Exactly. I was just about to say it. Visual schedules can aid in reducing anxiety and confusion, and they also increase independence. So who follows the type of schedule? If you can pop that in the chat, if you have a visual schedule, like I've got one in my iPhone, so that's my visual schedule. It tells me what I'm doing and what my children are doing, what my husband's doing during that week. So if you have a visual schedule of some sort, what does it look like? Is it on your phone? Is it on the back of the door? Is it on a calendar? Do you have a big app that everyone shares on your in your family? Do you have a centralized calendar online for your family? Sometimes I've seen some fantastic calendars on pantry doors that has everybody's name in the family on the calendar. So there's a family of 5, and it's got the mum, the dad, and the 3 children, and they have then all the dates across, and they have who's got what on what date. So might have like Tina's got netball on Tuesdays, and Joey's got soccer on Thursdays, and so-and-so's got a dentist appointment. So Megan's got a calendar that you'll write on. So that's your visual schedule, because visuals can be old school diary. It's okay. I love a bit of paper. Yep, your phone is linked to everyone in the family, and that's a really great way of keeping everyone linked in. So Jessica can probably she's just got to click connect, I think, Shelley, if you could let her know that. Monthly calendars with individual daily activities, so meal plans. Yes, so some people use meal planning. So I do that. So I plan my meals for the week. That might be a little bit crazy for some people, but I have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I write down what dinner meals I'm cooking for the week. It's my visual schedule. And then I go from there, and then I make a shopping list, and then I buy the stuff online, get it sent, and then I'm ready to go for the week. So, yes, but I think the iPhone is great in terms of being a visual calendar, visual schedule for families. It always works well. I actually like visuals like in front of me. I find them really supportive. If I even like a task list is like a visual. So, where you're crossing it off, and a lot of people use that on their phone, but I really like to write it down on paper. So sometimes your visual schedule, you can have preferences for types of visual schedules. All right, so let's move on. So we've got what they are. We all know what they are. So how can you use them? So before creating a visual schedule for any student, uh, you need to choose the sort of symbols that are in or that you're going to use. So that means you've got to actually understand the cognitive capacity of the student, how much they understand. Do they need photographs or items? That would be for students that actually have a low level of cognitive functioning. Do they require, can they cope with pictures? So just, like cartoon pictures, for example, or printouts or something. Can they cope with words? So a high school student might just need some words, or do they need a combination? If you're going to be making visuals and visual schedules for students, talk with the teacher about or the student's speech therapist as to what they might need, because often as a teacher aide, you would be making visuals and visual schedules for students. Now, as I said, photos are easy to comprehend. So, for example, a photo of the assembly hall at school would be easier to understand than a generic comic kind of picture of an assembly hall. Um, and, we all have symbols in life and visuals. All our road signs are pretty much visual. Merging lanes, think about what happens there. You've got the two arrows going into one. So there's lots of different symbols that we use that are visual. And then you need to determine, once you know what type of picture, you need to determine how much material to present on that picture to get the student's attention and to get your message across. It could be on a visual schedule, it could be first then. You could have 3 or 4 steps, you could have 5 steps, or it could have an entire day. It depends on the student. So the following steps are involved in making a visual schedule. So determine the time or the times of day when you need your visuals. It could include class time or transitions or other stressful parts of the day or the week that your students need it. It doesn't need to be for every part of every day. So determine what you want to convey to the students, such as 2 steps in a transition or a visual list of activities to encourage that independence during that session. You should create the visual in such a way that you and the student can see when things are completed. So this might mean there's a tick the box or the deleting of the image, so the image might come off and go into a finish box. So you've got to be able to see that, when you finish that task or that part of the activity. Make a list of what visuals you want to include in your schedule. And then get your photos, get your pictures or your other material that you've got to source and print them out, or take photographs if you need to take photographs. And then you've got to create the visual. So you've got to know that when you create your visual, that you've got to actually, it's a great idea to print them at the same size for the same purpose. You've got to have a few different sort of sets of sizes. So if it's going to be on a desk, you might want to use a 3 centimetre square. If it's going to be used for the class, you might want to use something, bigger, like a 7 centimetre square, something like that. So you create visuals. So you might usually print it in colour. Great to use colour. And then you can laminate it. You're going to be friends with the laminator when you're using visuals. So yeah, you can then use either blue tack or Velcro or some other adhesive to move the visuals around. Now, as I said, to make visuals more durable, you're going to need to laminate them. You can make one-off visuals, so you can just write or scribble on a piece of paper as a visual, perfectly fine. But if you want to make them durable and use them over and over again, you're going to laminate them. So once you've made your visuals, You've got to teach the visual. So you've got to make sure you tell the student what it is, what it looks like, what it means. So if you've got a picture of the world, for example, that might mean a geography lesson. So you got to teach the students what that visual means. What's that? When they see that picture of the world, what does that mean? So teach it. Teach the students how to remove the visual, where to put it when they finish the activity. Does it go on the finish box? Does it go back on the Velcro wall? Does it go at the back of their folder in a box? So teach how to use the visual. And place the visuals in a place where they can be seen. No point in making visuals if they're not going to be used. It could be on, on the wall, in a folder, in a box, something like that. So make sure that it is visible and easy to access and use. And you could then use the visuals all the time. Use it, so that it just becomes a way of life, and they're portable, so you can take them to different locations. You can use a small visual to take, to the hall. So you might have a big visual of the hall when it's assembly time up on the wall for the whole class, but you might have a visual of, that a student can take with them that has a small one that has the visual of the hall, which means assembly, and then it might have a visual afterwards that says, sport. So they know that once they've gotten through assembly, they can go and do sport. And so that's a nice portable one. Keep the language on your visuals simple. So it might just say assembly is finished, or time for sport, or just sport, or things like that. So very simple language. So learning to use visuals is a process for some students, and it may take some time for them to understand and use them and their purpose. And prompts and cues will be needed to actually use them, and you can gradually fade those prompts and cues once they learn how to use it. And make sure you also use a finish box. Now, in special education, and through other areas as well, finish is indicated by a black and white checker, like at the races, the black and white checkered flag. So if you want to indicate finish in the classroom, print off a black and white checkered piece of paper and cover a box that you hold the visuals in, and that means it's finished. All right. Oh, and just one more thing about visuals is you need to know where to put your Velcro, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because got to have some I guess people got to keep to some standards. All right, so let's have a look at the first then board. So a first then board is a visual strategy to help children with a specific task. Now, this strategy displays two pictures, a first and then a then. Sometimes it's called first or next. Now, the first picture is usually a non-preferred activity, and the second picture, the then, is a picture of a preferred activity. So the child has to do the non-preferred activity first before they get to do the then, the preferred activity. It helps, having these helps with both the receptive, so the understanding, and the expressive communication, so that the talking. So children benefit from knowing exactly what's expected of them. In addition, by using pictures, the visual is there for the child to refer to, even if the spoken word is gone. So it's there as a visual reminder, because words are fleeting. So how does it work? So to help with specific task completion, the teacher or the therapist or the teacher aide will place the two visuals on, and they'll be in sequence. So it'll be first, writing, then computer. First maths, then dinosaurs. And the pictures should have words with them. So you can see an example on the screen. We actually have the word writing and then the word computer there as well. So it actually helps with receptive and expressive language and reading and writing because you've got the words with the pictures. So who can use these strategies? Well, a first then board is a visual strategy that parents, teachers, therapists can use to get a student to complete a desired task. As a very young student, so maybe a preschooler can use a simple first then board, or a child with autism could use a first then board. Many students, not all, but many students on the spectrum have language and behaviour needs that respond really well to a first then board. A student with cognitive delays could also use a first then board, or a first then chart, because it's a simple schedule of what to do. And a child with behaviour difficulties can understand that there's a set end to a non-preferred task, and then they can have their preferred choice. So, with the choices displayed, they become more concrete, and it's sort of like a little contract, really, between the child and the educator or the adult, so that the child knows that first they need to do this, then I'll get the thing that I really want. What's really important is follow through. So if you've said, do your writing, then you'll get computer, they must get the computer. I think you can even use first then in high school, although it looks really simple. Some of your high school students aren't functioning at a very high level, but if you know that like their iPhone is really motivating for them, you can pop in, have a first then, and it might not look with a picture like that. You might use an emoji or something like that, but you can say first, your maths, then iPhone time, and you might have a timer attached to that as well. Okay, so they can be used in all different situations. Now, where do you get your pictures from? So you've got to be careful with pictures. So some pictures are licensed, so you can't use those. The ones you can see here, they are from what's called PEX, Picture Exchange Communication System, which I have a license to use. You can get them from there. You can get them from a board maker. That's a program that you can purchase, or your school might have. Twinkle is a website, an Australian website that you can join, and you can actually get some visuals from there. ClipArt has some visuals, and you can obviously use photos. Shelley's just saying it's often important to have the then activity occur straight after the first activity has been completed. Absolutely. Having the then delayed can cause a negative response. Absolutely. Got to follow through. That's what I was meaning, like follow through. So as they've done that, as soon as they've done it, then they get it. Like I was actually in a school for specific purpose. That's what we call them in New South Wales. Yesterday, they're schools for children with moderate to severe intellectual disability and physical disability, and they had a slightly different spin on the first then. They had I'm working for, and so same thing, I'm working for. They chose what they were working for, so they could choose from, blocks or dress ups or whatever it was they wanted to choose from. First, they had to do their literacy work, then they got to have their choice. So, and they got to have it as soon as they were finished because they'd done their work. So absolutely important. No delayed gratification there, instant gratification when they've completed the task. All right, moving on to a class activity schedule. So what are these? So activity schedules show the activities to complete in a session. So for example, in the morning session in the school, you might have a morning routine or roll call or something like that. Then you might have English or writing, then library, and then recess. That might be the morning schedule that you might happen. So I've put circle time here on this visual here. So they might be the activities that you've got on your class schedule at the front of the room. It might go from left to right, or it might go from top to bottom. It doesn't really matter. Arrows are helpful. They don't have to be there. But when you do actually finish that activity. So when circle time, getting together and finding out how everyone is finished, take it off. You might sign finished. This is the sign for finished, and you pop it into the finished box. And you can see on the screen there, I've got that black and white check there. Have a box. It can go into there. And yeah, and then when writing's done, you complete the writing, pop it into the finished box. So this is a broad activity or class schedule. You might then say, for example, with a writing one, writing might have a schedule within inside it. So what's involved in the actual writing schedule. So a class schedule is a bit of a broad visual of what's happening in that day. So let's have a look at a desk schedule. These is where you kind of get into the nitty gritty. So it breaks the activities down even further. So a desk schedule for writing, so we had that writing task on the class schedule, it might look something like this. Name. So that means you've taught them about it, but name means putting your name on the sheet. Then you've got writing, so they've got to do the writing on the sheet. Then the next step on the desk schedule is edit. And then it says to reread. That means reread. I haven't put any words on that one either. Reread the what you've done, and then you can have the iPad. And I haven't got words on that either, and I should have put words on those. So your desk schedule breaks things down that are in the class schedule. And these work really, really well for children with autism spectrum disorder. Even if you are writing, like if the writing, for example, was about, you had to write a sentence about frogs, you might even have part of your desk schedule that, you've got to check for capital letters, punctuation, finger spaces, reread your iPad. So that's, edit might have a few extra words on there. And then, you've broken that down for them. And when they're finished, they take their name. When they've written their name, they can take that off and put it wherever the finish box is for that. When they've done their writing, they can take that off. Then they know they're up to editing their work, and so on. All right. So they're desk schedules. Now, high school is a little bit, I guess, trickier. We've just got to think a little bit differently. So you can use visuals for high school as well. Just starts to change a little bit. With these, we need to make sure that they're developmentally appropriate for the students in high school. So you might want to consider more abstract pictures or types of emojis and things like that for the students, because then it's more developmentally appropriate in high school to have something that looks like an emoji than having a cartoon picture. You don't feel like so I guess young or out of it if you have that sort of thing. So think about emojis and little kind of clip art for high school students, and you'd be surprised how helpful a visual is. You might think that a student doesn't need a visual. Give them a visual anyway, a visual schedule, because it really is supportive in knowing what to do. So got to be looking for your pictures in different sorts of places. All right, so let's have a few tips on making visuals. Some teacher aides become visual, making experts. So you may have weekly schedules in the home or in the school. They give you, as a broad outline, as I said. So there's an example one there. But when making visuals, I advise colour. Colour is helpful to help distinguish things. Okay, so print your visuals in colour. Some schools are a little bit tight on the colour printer, but if that's a situation in a school you work at, just talk to someone higher up and say, look, it's really important that students that I'm working with have colour, because it helps to distinguish what the visual means to them. So print in colour. Always print more than what you need. Reason being, visuals disappear. It's like, the socks in the washing, they disappear and you don't know where they go. So print more than what you need. Store them well. So sometimes you might have like a little tackle box, like a fishing tackle box to put all your visuals in. You can alphabetize it if you want. You might have them in like a file, like, you know, the old recipe boxes, things like that. You can store them like that. So store them well. Have a high quality cutter. So sometimes the cutters in the office are a little dodgy, okay, because they get used by everybody and they don't cut straight. That's really frustrating if you're a little bit, you know, like things straight. So sometimes it's great to get your own cutter, keep it in your own desk, label it, say, you know, Mrs. Robinson's stuff, hands off. So get a high quality cutter. Even sometimes in the classroom, if you're in a classroom full time, having your own laminator in the classroom instead of having to go down to the office can be super helpful. They're fairly inexpensive these days. Get an A4 one, an A3 one. And then there's the decision. Do you, and this is a really serious decision, do you cut the piece of paper for the visual, then laminate, then cut, or do you just stick the whole page of visuals in, laminate it, and then cut it? Choice is up to you. In different settings, it could be different. If you've got a visual chewer in your classroom, no point in cutting, laminating, and cutting again, because if they get chewed anyway, they're gone. If your students that you're working with kind of are more neurotypical in their behaviours, then cutting and laminating and cutting again, so you've got a laminating edge around the edge of the visual to hold the paper in, then that's the way to go because it is more durable. Whereas if you just put a whole page of visuals on and cut through the laminated, it doesn't hold it together for as long. Okay, so that's my hot tip about visuals and lamination. The other one is around Velcro. So if you're going to use Velcro to actually move your visuals around, there's a couple of things to remember. It's quite pricey. So I like to use the dots for not on the visuals, but onto the surfaces that you might be putting visuals onto, because you can see them when there's no visual there. But they're more expensive. So on the back of the visual, you can just use the strips and cut it into little bits of visual, and that way you don't have to, doesn't cost as much for the school. And you've got to remember this one, soft stays. All right. So you know how there's two parts of the visual, there's the soft one and there's the rough one. The soft stays. So that's the one that goes on the wall. So sometimes in schools you have walls that have like a carpety sort of fabric on the walls, and sometimes you have, you know, your desk schedule on the desk. Make sure the soft is on the actual schedule. On the back of the actual visual, put the rough. The rough moves. Stick to it and you won't have any problems of visuals not sticking. If you're going to use, when you're doing visuals and you want to do the cut, laminate, cut system, use scissors or your cutter, but when you're putting them onto your laminating sheets, use a bit of glue stick to keep them in place. Otherwise, when you put them in, they all fall everywhere. So popping those in like that is really helpful.